Well, sure, anything is possible, and that's why I think the examination and the reform will have to be taken on in a very responsible way. In other words, this isn't a quick fix. It's one of those things that's going to take time. On the other hand, I think everyone at this juncture would acknowledge that a big source of the banking crisis right now is that these banks simply don't know how to value a whole set of assets. They are in a position where every 90 days they must revalue the assets. And so we're now in a downward spiral, such as we saw today in the markets, where confidence is literally draining out of these bank stocks simply because everyone assumes that we don't really know how toxic these assets are, but they're probably going to get worse before they get better.
Stephen Lieb, let me bring you into this conversation. Your thoughts on this issue?
Okay, well, Peter, very quickly, I mean, if you just look at the market today and contrast it with what was happening in October, November, today was absolutely horrible for the financial stocks, as you had a graphic earlier. They were down about 17%. But if you look at commodities today, they were about down 1.5%. Oil and other commodities actually were up today. So that the market believes that the woes of the financial sector are not going to drag the economies along with it. What they believe instead, at least this is what I think the message of the market, is they believe the financial sector of this country is going to become very tightly controlled, highly, highly regulated. And again, if you listen to what Larry Summers said this weekend, that's exactly what he said. And if you listen to the message that's coming from the Obama economic advisors, that's exactly the message. We're going to have a highly regulated banking sector. No more acquisitions with government money. Instead, the banks are going to be asked and told to lend money. And it's going to be like maybe the old AT&T. We may just have one bank traded on the stock market. I'm being Stephen, a little funny here.
Let me jump in because I think what Bob McTeer would say, and I would let him speak for himself in just a moment, but if you impose more limits, more restrictions on these banks, you're going to put them in even a worse situation, aren't you?
No, not if the government is backing them up with all their money. I mean, how can they be in worse situation? If the government's guaranteeing their assets, they can't really be in worse situation. I mean, what I think investors are fearful of is that return on equity. There'll be all sorts of controls on these banks. And that may be, at least that appears to be the way the Obama administration is going to handle this crisis.
All right. Stephen Lieb, Carly Fiorina, Bob McTeer, Bill Galston, going to ask you all to sit tight. We're going to take a quick break, check in on the overseas markets. Also going to take a closer look what today's inauguration means for America's black community. Stay with us after this short break here on Money in Politics. We're going to continue. Welcome back to Money in Politics, joined again by Carly Fiorina, Bob McTeer, Bill Galston, and Stephen Lieb, talking about some of the other domestic items on the Barack Obama agenda. And he talked, Bill Galston, about those people, the naysayers who say we can't accomplish all these big things at once. He seemed to be saying today, yes, we can. And let me throw out health care out there. A lot of people interested in this issue. He said he wants to pursue it in his first year. Is that truly possible, given all the other challenges we face?
I think he has a shot at it for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's more consensus about the model, the way forward, than there was 15 years ago when the Clinton administration tried to do it. And secondly, there's a lot more support in the business community now than there was 15 years ago. And so if he can figure out how to get his arms around the financing of means-tested vouchers for people who can't afford to buy it on the private market, then he might be able to phase it in. Where I think he's going to have a tougher time is with his energy and environment program. Because whether you're talking about cap and trade or a carbon tax or any other major environmental initiative, that is going to have disruptive short-term effects on the economy at a time when the economy can least afford it.
Bob McTeer, how about that? If we tackle climate change, try and overhaul the healthcare system in this country, at the same time we're trying to recapitalize banks, get this economy out of a rut, is it all possible?
Well, I think we have to prioritize and distinguish between what's important and what's urgent. And the banking system, financial system is urgent. These other things are important, but we can afford to take our time a little bit. You know, we got into the banking crisis because of moral hazard, when the people making the mortgages ceased to be the ones that were holding them and at risk. If we do that to the health care system and we further separate the people who make the decisions to buy health care from those who pay for it, we're just creating another mess. We have to have consumer-driven health care if it's going to work.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Finish your thought there.
Well, I wanted to go back and say something else about mark-to-market. I know that's
please do. I know we cut you short earlier, so please go ahead.
Well, I agree with what Carly said, and I'd just like to add to that. I don't think we have to pull a curtain across the bank's balance sheet. We don't have to go back to opaqueness. We can leave all the information there. What needs to be done is to break the link between the mark and regulatory capital. You know, if a bank has a mortgage-backed security that represents 1,000 mortgages, and just a handful of those mortgages look questionable, they have to write down the whole 1,000 bag there. If those mortgages were on the bank's balance sheet individually, they wouldn't have to. And so treating a sack of potatoes with 3 bad potatoes in it like the whole bag has gone bad is just insane, in my opinion.
All right, let me pick up on that again, because I know this is a big issue. In fact, I want to share with you all some breaking news here coming across my Bloomberg Professional Service, exclusive here at Bloomberg. Tim Geithner set to testify tomorrow. Barack Obama's picked to be the Treasury Secretary. His testimony, prepared testimony in front of the Senate Finance Committee. There have been issues about his taxes. He does say in his prepared testimony that he is prepared, that the economy requires action, not seen in a generation. He's pledging serious reform of the TARP program, including tough conditions on those recipients of aid from the government, funding from the government. So some of the headlines from Tim Geithner's testimony. Again, a lot of people waiting to see if he's going to be confirmed. Stephen Lieb, let me pick up on that. Again, we're going back to the TARP issue. It does seem like the financial sector is the crux of a lot of the problems facing the country right now. First of all, your take on Tim Geithner. Should he be confirmed? Is he the right guy for the job?
I think he is the right guy for the job. I think he's been de facto Secretary of Treasury now since President Obama was elected back in November. And I think there's a great sense of continuity. And, yeah, I think things are going to be a lot different under President Obama than they have been under President Bush. And one of those differences is going to be the accountability of banks, the regulation of banks, and how the TARP money is administered. Just as he said, I mean, just quote from him. Banks are going to be held accountable, and the money is going to be spent in a far different way than it has been spent. People that are expecting total continuity with the Bush administration, they have a very, very big surprise coming.
Carly Fiorina, you want to pick up on that? Because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but your suggestion earlier is you think maybe this was just changes around the edges. The basic thrust of the Bush plan, the Bush TARP plan would continue. It doesn't. It's not clear exactly from the testimony we're seeing right now that major changes are in store, but certainly some modifications.
Oh, I certainly agree there will be modifications, and I did not at all intend to imply that Obama administration would be the same as a Bush administration. What I was pointing out, however, is that some of the key players and the key architects are staying in place. I certainly absolutely agree that one of the failures of the Bush administration in the final 4 months was their lack of clarity about how they would use the TARP and their lack of insistence on transparency and accountability, and frankly, the lack of effectiveness in those funds in getting the credit moving again. And all of those things can and should and must be improved, and I think they will be improved.
Are you worried, Carly Fiorina, about Tim Geithner as Treasury Secretary? He's been part of the program up till now.
Well, I think I wouldn't say I'm worried about him. I guess what I'm advocating, however, is that we look for some new ideas beyond more TARP, more stimulus, and more big government spending. Because I think we have to remember, first of all, there have been many, many comparisons made to the Depression, but one of the comparisons that doesn't work anymore is the era of the Depression was an era when big government, big labor, big companies drove the economy. That's simply not true anymore. And so if we don't somehow find a way to get innovation and entrepreneurship flourishing again, to get consumers buying again, to get small businesses hiring again, to get confidence in the banking system again, then the big stimulus packages may be necessary, but they won't be sufficient. And for all those things that I just mentioned to happen, I think we're going to have to look at some additional new ideas. Mark-to-market is one. I think we should be looking at some very creative and focused tax policies towards the small business arena. Many things will be different. but we need to get the fundamental engines of the economy going.
Listen, the four of you have been very kind with your time to share with us on this inauguration night. Thank you again for joining us here on Money and Politics. We appreciate it very much.